My name is Jordan Louie, and I'll be refuting the speech given by Anel on how the Federal Dream Act will have significant advantages to the United States. She supports her claim with three supporting arguments. The first one is that undocumented students need to be considered for residency. The second one is that undocumented students are beneficial to the U.S. economy. And the third one being that undocumented students should need to be integrated into our higher educational system. However, just based on the wording of the first three arguments, I think it's clear to see that she doesn't suggest any benefits towards what giving the undocumented student citizenship will do for the United States that they don't already do now. Her first supporting claim is that undocumented students need to be considered for residency. And her first kind of support to that is that undocumented students are wrongly called illegals. However, mostly this comes up in terms of the media, and most of them follow the Associated Press, which is a group that decides how they're going to term, what is the definition and who qualifies for a term. And they term the phrase illegal immigrants because while they're not breaking any judicial law, criminal law, they are breaking a civil law by being here in the United States illegal without the proper paperwork. She later goes on to support this by saying that undocumented students need to be considered American. And I don't know if any of you have ever filled out, what is your ethnicity, but American is not one of them. So how can you say that, by being, how can you say what is American when, not even the United States accepts what, defines what is American or not. And then her third point is that, her third support is that marginalization has a negative impact on undocumented students. Marginalization, according to how Merriam-Webster defines it, is to demote somebody or something into exile to an unimportant or powerless position in a society or group. It's not really fair to say that this bad thing, exiling someone is a bad thing and that we, need to stop it. But how does that go about? How is making them a citizen in the United States going to help us at all? She doesn't give, in her first claim, she doesn't give any benefits that we're going to receive as a nation by making them into citizens. Her second supporting claim is that undocumented students are beneficial to the U.S. economy, and she supports this in two major ways. The first way is that undocumented students pay taxes, and that they have a positive influence on the local economy. However, her support, the professor who she quotes from, is a professor of Latin American Studies at a college, so it's not really a great source for economic advice and opinion. Her second kind of support to this is that while they give a whole bunch, while paying taxes, that they receive no benefits from our U.S. economy, which I have to completely disagree with. If the U.S. economy is key to our quality of life, when they call 911, someone's going to pick up and the fire department or the police will be there no matter their immigration status. If they walk into the hospital, thanks to the Emergency Medical Treatment Act and Labor Act, the federal government requires hospitals to treat anyone who walks in until they're able to live until they're able to support themselves and care for themselves. So I think they get a lot of benefits from the U.S. economy without being citizens. And again, she fails to give any points that by giving them citizenship, look at this benefit we're going to receive back from them. Her third point is that undocumented students need to be integrated into the higher education system. But I think she refutes herself in one of her quotes. She says that from one of her examples, she says that almost 7,000 to 13,000 undocumented students go on each year to college. So 7,000 to 13,000 students are going on to college. How are they not already integrated into our system? One of the points she tries to make is that the 14th Amendment needs to be applied to higher education. The 14th Amendment is one that prohibits the government from denying you life, liberty, and property. However, there's no, according to College Board, who does the SAT and is a great resource if you're trying to look for colleges and how to get in, you know, they say there is no federal or state law that prohibits any undocumented worker from entering a university. Those are all university policies. So the 14th Amendment doesn't really apply because the state nor the federal government is denying the students the rights to higher education. She also says that undocumented students can contribute greatly to the workforce. However, a lot of universities fill their program with, you know, by spots. We're looking for 5 spots, 5 people to fill the civil engineering spots. And if the undocumented student hadn't applied, that degree, which is generally what benefits society, would have gone to someone else who could have applied it already. So in the end, while she states, you know, while the only benefits she mentions are ones that the U.S. already gets from these undocumented students, she never really gives any argument to why we should make them any benefits that we would gain by making them residents.
All right, some of the same issues that I've mentioned to a couple other people are coming up here. First of all, on the organizational stuff, everything is very good, and the delivery material, I think you're doing a solid job on that, so I don't see any big problems there. The issue has to do primarily with developing an affirmative response to some of the claims. Everything seems very passive in response to these arguments. You get into this discussion about who defines what an illegal is, and you're talking about the AP's use in journalism. Why that's important is never explained. Why if the advocate is right or wrong about this is not assessed and evaluated, and it seems like you spend a great deal of time on it. The same thing with defining what an American is. You know, we're back to, I mean, you make it sound like it's a question of ethnicity as opposed to citizenship. And I think citizenship is primarily the criteria that's going on here. And I think that you ought to be basing some of your argument on this notion of citizenship. There doesn't seem like there's any reason that you couldn't do that. And again, I did like the challenge that you made for the most part that you kept repeating, and that is that the advocate claimed that there were benefits, but they only showed a need for the undocumented aliens or the illegal aliens or the students who are of undocumented status or whatever the term is that we're using on them, why it would be beneficial for them, but not necessarily showing why it would be beneficial for the country. And I thought that that was a good challenge. I think, for example, you could do a little bit more to show what some of the consequences to the country would be, either in the sense of trying to find additional aid or limited access to the colleges and universities, or maybe there are some issues related to illegal immigration that have negative economic consequences, and then that would strengthen your point a little bit. This same kind of issue that goes on with marginalization goes on with the illegals. There's a lot of definition here, but in the end, what is the point that you were trying to make? I think that needs to be a little bit clearer. Your second point, it sounded like you labeled the second point twice, so I guess this is actually the second point. And I understand what you're talking about here. You kind of challenge the credentials of the advocate's expert that they're citing. I don't know that that gets you very much. The better argument, I think, is that there are, in fact, benefits that the aliens get that they don't necessarily pay for, that have consequences to us. And you mentioned the hospitals as an illustration of that. You got a piece of factual data on that point. That, I thought, was the clearest argument that you made, and it addresses the economic argument that the advocate was talking about. The third point, I did like the fact that you pointed out, look, the advocate's own evidence says 7,000 to 13,000 of them are going to college right now. That seems like a pretty substantial number. How different would it be if we had the DREAM Act, for instance? I think that's a legitimate question. And then say,